Hey there, you're listening to Paradigm Shift, a podcast about people building the future and pivotal moments in their journey. I'm Ashish, and I'm joined by my co host Zane, and today we're super excited to have Kunal Shah on the show. Kunal has an unmatched track record as a founder, investor, and a thinker. He's the founder of CRED, a fintech startup based in India that's valued over $6.4 billion. He also started one of India's earliest fintech companies, Freecharge, which he sold to Snapdeal in 2015 for $450 million. He's also a prolific angel investor in over 200 Indian startups. And finally, he shares insightful philosophical wisdom on Twitter, which I highly recommend you check out. With all that said, welcome, Kunal.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashish and Zain. I've never been told you can be a prolific thinker, so that's a new for me. But with a good track record of thinking.
So I would love to start in the early days. We're talking today, and you're Kunal Shah. You're very successful, very established. A lot of people look up to you, rightfully so, I think. But that wasn't always the case, right? Like everyone has to start somewhere. So I have a few questions about like kind of your upbringing. I know you started in a Gujarati family business. My family runs gas stations and motels in the U.S., so we're not Gujarati, but we swim in those circles. So I would love to hear, what are some of what was that environment like, and then what were some of the important lessons that you drew from that community?
Uh, I think I grew up in a joint family where my brother was the seventh brother of seven brothers, and I think he grew up in affluence, but by the time I was born and I was in my teenage, we kind of lost a bunch of wealth, largely to illnesses and bad business choices that the family made. And by the time I got to like 14, 15, uh, the family had kind of split, and my dad had unsuccessful businesses, which kind of forced us to move from a decent sized place to a very small place, literally a 100 square feet room with just my mom, dad, brother, and I were uh, living there. And uh, I think I had to learn most of the things because of that early lessons. I had to kind of start earning money from when I was 14, 15. I did bunch of things, including being a delivery boy to a data entry operator to all sorts of things, anything that could make money, basically. And I think the upbringing was interesting because as a Gujarati family, like there were no real summer vacations as such. You had to just go to the shop and be helping the family in the business, whatever that meant, including going to the bank or doing something for the business, going and taking orders, like whatever it meant, and being around business community. Uh, I did not know that summer vacations were supposed to be something else, really. Like it was like, okay, I have to get to business, and I still remember like very early days, like the family started giving me some kind of a daily salary, which they told me I have to go and deposit every day to the bank, which was an interesting experience by itself. That I had to. I remember I used to get like either 2 rupees or 5 rupees, which even for Indian standard means nothing. And I had to go and deposit that every day. And the bank would also laugh at you doing this ritual, but it kind of taught the discipline of kind of earning and depositing money and seeing your bank balance grow. And every now and then you have a situation where you get some Diwali, family gifts and bonuses, and you're like, okay, the first thing you're supposed to do is go and deposit in the bank, and like you see that game kind of grow. Uh, but I think what I learned from that experience was that understanding of money was an important skill, and I did not realize that many people were not getting that skill. It's just that because you only grow around a certain type of family members, you think that that's what all the kids do, right? And you would be shocked at how they would struggle in certain subjects in their exams because it was not intuitive for them to think about business profits and cost price and sales price. And I would like do mental math on these kind of things because you better be good at this, right? And And Gujarati families can be quite brutal if you are just academically smart. You have to be also street smart. And if you are not street smart, you will be considered as like the geek of the family, not the one who's going to be successful. And I think what I also learned that business families do value problem solving skills as more important value than just academics, which is interesting. The world gives you money for solving problems and not scoring well in your exams. But the kind of variety of problems that we deal with early in our childhood is not a wide range of them, right? So I think that understanding that if you solve a problem, you get money. You are thrown a challenge, you solve that, you get money. And I mean, I have learned that I don't have kids, but I've run these experiments on so many other kids who I come across with friends and families, and I'm like, if you solve this problem, I'm gonna give you this money. I'm gonna solve this problem, and you do this money, and it's just fascinating to see how kids become so much more creative. Like I recently was with a few kids, um, and we were not getting a reservation at a dining means at a dining place, and I'm like, if you can somehow convince them and get us a reservation, you're gonna get, let's say, $100 equivalent for this. And it was impossible. Like this place, there was no way we were gonna get it because we just like winged our way to this place and like, oh, we're gonna get a reservation, and they were booked completely. But the kids just figured out like what they did was interesting. They decided to give $50 as a share to the guy who was giving a reservation, to saying that, hey, this is the thing we've been offered. And while it can borderline on did you do an ethical behavior or not, but they did solve a problem, right? And therefore you can treat your values as part of that lesson, saying that, hey, this is not the right way of doing it, you should not do that or whatever, right? But the thing is that they can think about, okay, I have to see that thing and I have to cross that hurdle, and they can't start thinking about it. So I think bunch of those experiences, but largely uh, constraints, uh, uh, bootstrap childhood.
Were you going to school as well, Kunal? And what kind of store was it, or what were the businesses that you were sort of getting pulled into?
I started doing my undergrad in philosophy, largely because it was the only batch available between 7 to 9 a.m. and I had to do a full-time job after that. So I chose philosophy for that reason. I dropped out of science stream and I was going to pursue a career in or academics in STEM, but I had to move to philosophy. And it's not a brightest kids don't go to humanities in India. It's like you're literally like the lost cause of the family if you ever go to humanities. So it was sort of a thing, but I realized that it was insanely powerful philosophy, and it taught me how to think, and it taught me to seek truth uh, as a perpetual pursuit. And I think I'm still seeking truth. I just happen to be doing businesses on the side. It's just that I think my primary purpose of life is still to seek truth constantly, right? And in terms of the kind of businesses I did, I was selling uh, mixtapes pirated from the internet music. I was selling mehndi cones. I was writing some software here and there. I would like anything. Like you tell me that there's going to be money for doing this, and I would have signed up for it.
And were you supporting your family too? Was that part of like the
Yeah, I had to.
pressure?
I had to. I think that's what was interesting because I learned how to take responsibility since I was 15. So instead of getting money from the family, I was supporting the family. Uh, and it was not easy because you don't know how the whole thing works. And like, I still remember not being able to buy groceries for the month because you just did not, and like you had to take something on credit and convince the guy, and you could not pay the credit, so I had to change the grocer, convince them that I will pay you next month, and act as if you are some affluent person, that you will kind of start this accounting and give it to you later on. And I think because it was just about survival.
The stuff about studying philosophy is interesting. For me, that explains a lot of your your style on Twitter. I think makes a lot more sense because you do have this like whimsical like philosophy kind of style, which is very engaging and also interesting. And so that's really interesting like background to learn about.
Thank you.
That is fascinating. I mean, that's a lot of pressure to have as a young kid, it's really amazing. And I can see how that would like create a lot of hunger and scrappiness. Um, I would love to like transition to, you know, like building products because you've developed a lot of kind of interesting frameworks on how you on how you build things and how you evaluate products. And I'm sure you were thinking about this even in the mixtape days, mixtape and the Mandy brands. Like I think you were thinking about framing and what is a good product, what is a good initial product, And one of the frameworks you've written about, which I think is really interesting, is the Delta 4 framework. Uh, could you tell us a bit about that? I think it's such a simple, useful framework for founders.
Yeah. So Delta 4 framework is something that I wrote or talked about between my two startups, Freecharge and CRED. And it was largely with this problem statement that how can a not bright philosophy major can have potentially the largest exit in India, and so many bright kids from IIT are not kind of making it big in business, and how what if you could reduce the chance of failure of startups, then the country would prosper dramatically, and how do you kind of remove the error rate? And I was not even thinking this from an investment perspective. It was a philosophical pursuit that what makes um uh, things kind of become wealth in some ways. And I was reading all sorts of things between physics to evolutionary biology to startups. Like I was just pretty much going all over the place. And I think the framework, I don't know what was the genesis of this framework. I think it was a combination of all of these things. Uh, and I thought about this from a species perspective, that a species kind of makes another species redundant when they become more efficient at earning calories for the calories that they spend, right? Like it's an efficiency framework eventually, and over a period of time, 99% of species have died, and the more efficient ones continue to be there, and that's true for businesses as well. 99% of businesses ever created would have probably been dead by now, right? And they are constantly getting replaced by more hyper efficient ones. And I was like, okay, how do we measure this? And I came up with a simple framework that imagine there are two businesses. One is the old behavior, let's say taking a cabs the old way, and taking the cabs the new way, that's Uber. And how do you rate them on efficiency? And you kind of do a large sample set, and you get an answer that usually has, let's say most people would say old is like 2 on 10, and Uber is like, let's say 7 on 10 or 8 on 10. Many people would say that. And suddenly you realize that, oh, the delta is between that is greater than 4. And the 4 is an interesting thing. It was more from the biology perspective than when does a species kind of do that. And I don't know where I read that. I was like, okay, if the delta is greater than or equal to 4 on a score that you kind of take from the users, you create three things. First is it's an irreversible behavior. When people experience a Delta 4 product, they never go back to the old product behavior. They're like, okay, I've found a way to be more energy efficient in life, and I will not go back to the old behavior. And the second one was like, you have insane amount of tolerance for that. Like even if Uber messes up, you're like, damn it, I'm just gonna go and call the old cab company. That doesn't happen, right? But it doesn't become Delta 4 at an airport, because if Uber doesn't work at the airport, you just go to the cab stand and like, I'm done. Like it's not Delta 4 at the airport, but it may be a great Delta 4. And humans are fantastic at kind of assigning cost of energy, time spent, money spent, all of that in some efficiency score, right? We just kind of combine all of these things into some kind of a scoring mechanism of efficiency in some ways. And the third one is a unique brag-worthy proposition. It's a UBP. When humans discover Delta 4, they can't stop talking about it. They will tell everybody about it. And think about how we all got on Uber. Not because we saw an ad, but some friend came to us and did a magic trick. Let me show you something cool, right? And I think therefore all Delta 4 products feel like magic, right? And not all of them create wealth. For example, we all have seen DALI and it's magical, but I can't see wealth creation out of it. Is it Delta 4 to how you could make images in the past? Maybe. Can it create disproportionate wealth? Maybe not, right? And I think like Prisma was another example. You could make great art using Prisma, but it doesn't create great wealth. So it has to have an existing pot of wealth or some kind of a value it is capturing. And you can think of this from a lens of entropic complexity. And this is a concept where energy, you think about energy is nothing but wealth is nothing but storage of energy, right? So you can think of one product as a way of storing energy. And when you discover delta 4, the old species dies and takes the energy to this one. And energy is ever growing, so you can kind of always say energy is not, the reason wealth is not zero sum, because energy is. So humans are doing nothing but converting all forms of energy into wealth. And therefore it seems that wealth is not zero sum, but wealth is zero sum, because humans are the only species that are converting all energy into all sort of different energy which is converting into wealth. So wealth is nothing but these batteries that we are creating around us. So, I'm trying to condense a more complex topic, and it was fascinating because I was like, this seems to work, and I had made a bunch of predictions about many of the existing startups that this will never meet Delta 4 and they will not succeed, and turned out to be true based on that. And I think Google had launched a couple of new products that time, and I talked about this. And I made a public announcement that this will cannot work because it's not Delta 4 to what I want to do. And it became an interesting framework. It's funny, Sequoia told me recently that it's part of their onboarding, teaching Delta 4 framework to part of the new analyst batch that comes. They actually, and it's fascinating because US is more truth-seeking than India is. Although Delta 4 is talked about in India, I've never seen VCs or founders talk much about it, but it's talked a lot about in the US because I think it's a more truth-seeking society.
So Kunal, that's amazing. That's a really fascinating framework. We'd love to like drill a little deeper and apply it almost like a case study to a few examples, so like someone listening can become like more proficient in it. So maybe it'd be fun to hear you sort of break down your two really successful companies, Freecharge and CRED, from the lens of Delta 4.
Yeah. I think Freecharge was Delta 4, but CRED is not. But you can actually make success happen without creating that, because if you make something efficient and you use activation energy to move them to a next state, people still don't go back to the old behavior. So let's take an example of this. Freecharge basically says that if you top up your mobile phones online, you get rewards for paying that. And it was great because topping up offline, going to the shop and trying to top up your phone was inefficient. And you really had to struggle. Like they would shut down at 6 p.m. You are stuck in a hostel room. You want data on your phone. And 99% of the country was on prepaid. It still is on prepaid connections. We do not have contracts like the US, and nobody's on a plan really in India. So it was Delta 4, much more than Delta 4, right? Because not only it gave a reward, but it made the behavior of recharging super efficient. But it was Delta 4 for youth and college kids and like all of that. It was not Delta 4 for, let's say, 60-year-olds, because transacting online for them is so much more inefficient than trying to just walk up to the shop and do it. So Delta 4 as a framework does not necessarily work across cohorts. You will always find, for example, buying Halloween costume can be Delta 4 if you're looking for a rare one. But if you want to dress up like Jeffrey Dahmer, you probably walk up to the regular store and get it because it's likely to be there. So it may not be Delta 4 in case of that product. So I think you can just...
What is a question you would ask a user, Kunal, to understand, okay, is Recharge Delta 4 for this college student? Is it Delta 4 for this? Like
you compare the old behavior and new behavior. You're saying that you recharge offline, go to the shop. So what's your efficiency score on recharging offline out of 10? What's your efficiency score when you use Freecharge? Right? For example, podcasts are impossible to become Delta 4. What's the efficiency score of listening to this podcast and another podcast? And can you really find the Delta 4? It's very hard to do, and therefore we struggle with that, right? And I think therefore certain businesses cannot generate Delta 4 quickly, right? Like, will you give up on Instagram for TikTok? maybe you will change your time spent. Can TikTok wipe out Instagram? Is an interesting question by itself. But Freecharge or any of the online recharge portals wiped out recharging offline, and the shops just died. Like all the shops that have a recharge shops, and there used to be like literally one every few hundred meters in the top 25, 30 cities. They all disappeared.
Yeah. So it's primarily an efficiency thing, and your hypothesis is if the efficiency is high enough, then there will be delight, there will be like, a new behavior, and people won't want to go back.
Humans are the only species that are constantly trying to find every way to be more efficient.
Yeah.
And technology is nothing but ways to find more ways of doing efficiency. For example, if you brought somebody from 1922 to 2022, they will think that we are gods. We just press a button and heat our food, and press the button and talk to somebody across the planet, press the button and food shows up. They will think we are gods. So when you compare it from a longer period of time, hyper efficiency almost makes us godlike.
Totally. So just staying with Freecharge, and then Ashish, I'll let you go next. I want to just take it through the full life cycle. So you built this product. It was Delta 4. I think that's very clear. It was a successful business, but I don't really know how successful and long-term enduring it has become since the acquisition. Like, how would you grade it on like the, that wealth capture, longevity of the business type of scoring?
Yeah. So I think Delta 4 is an interesting framework through which you can create unfair distribution. It does not ensure monetization, right? For example, Facebook figured out monetization much later on, but you found a Delta 4 way of making people spend time on a product, right? So imagine trying to stay in touch with people before Facebook as a concept existed, and after that, or WhatsApp as a concept existed, and now after that, right? And I think wealth creation sometimes takes a lot of time. For example, WhatsApp had to stick to no ads, and now they have figured out business APIs as a way to kind of monetize, and it takes a long time. Like India, there was a $0 revenue for WhatsApp for maybe a decade before they started monetizing now, but now they're at $1 billion of revenue because they just got business guys to send messages. Now, does it breach the principles of what the first company was built on? Maybe not. Or maybe it does, I don't know. But the thing is that wealth capture is a function of which cohort did you go after. For example, the mistake we made at Freecharge was we went after the customers which were not very affluent. Mm-hmm. And per capita income has a strong correlation to what wealth capture can you do out of that, right? But for example, if we had, turned Freecharge into a crypto platform or some kind of a real money gaming platform, we could have still made money because the ARPU for low per capita income users may not come from them trying to save time for money, but they are constantly trying to bet money to grow their wealth, right? And therefore, you will notice a pattern that usually lower per capita income users are rarely monetized for offering convenience, but more for hope of becoming high status or generating big wealth. And therefore, lottery as a business or gambling as a business is hugely dependent on lower per capita income, which is all about taking that chance and trying to make it big, right? And I mean, there are some interesting other businesses which provide the potential of Delta 4 in your income is, let's say, education, right? Everybody's like, okay, as long as you get a degree, like you're going to have your income grow and you're going to come out of middle class. But the problem is that if everybody gets it, then you have like this huge debt problem and nobody is having any jobs. So the thing is that it can become the problem because if you take everybody to the same place, then again, they are not more efficient than the other person, right?
Yeah, totally. So I have one more question on Freecharge, and then I know Ashish wants to take us to CRED. How would you describe the business model of Freecharge? And I know you had this efficiency going offline to online, but you also had rewards, right? So you had that extra incentive. Like, what made you add those rewards, and how did you fund them in the context of the business model?
So that was actually our monetization model. We had merchants who were funding these rewards to kind of incentivize users. So let's say you got a buy one, get one McDonald's burger or a buy one, get one barista coffee and so on and so forth. And they would actually acquire footfalls by giving these coupons. And coupons were not a big concept in India before Freecharge came along, and we were the large distribution of coupon platform. So the monetization came from telcos giving us a commission for selling the recharge and merchants giving us a commission to distribute their coupons. The challenge was that we could not really monetize them on financial services, which was the big promise that we thought could result in that, because if you can cross-sell financial products to them, you make significantly more higher ARPU. What ended up happening is we exited the business in hopes that we'll partner with a big platform and it can become bigger. Did not work out well.
Kunal, you said something earlier that I thought was really interesting, which was that CRED you don't think is Delta 4, which is surprising because CRED's like $6 billion. Anyone who watches IPL in India, I mean, honestly, your brand awareness in India must be massive. So it's clearly a successful business. So I'd love to hear more about like how is it so successful despite being Delta 4? And then also for people who don't know what CRED is, it might be helpful to just explain what the business is.
So CRED does many things now in terms of being a large fintech commerce business. But when we started, it was a very simple idea that if you pay your credit card bills on time on CRED, you get rewards for that. We took that playbook from Freecharge, but we changed the product. And the reason we changed the product because you can target the more affluent customers by, in India, only 30 million customers have a credit card. So it was a kind of a positive selection of affluent customers. So there are only two markers of strong affluence: ownership of a passenger car, 30 million of them, or ownership of a credit card, another 30 million of them. So we chose that we can go for credit card bill payments and you get rewards for that. It should work. The only problem was people were already paying their credit card bills online. So I was not able to generate the Delta 4 efficiency. So I had to incentivize a lot more, and you'll notice that Delta 4 products don't need advertising as much. If you can achieve Delta 4, you don't need as much advertising. Uber did not grow on the back of doing like these large media campaigns. It was mostly word of mouth that grew that product. But CRED, on the other hand, kind of has to spend a lot of activation energy to change the state. But when you experience CRED, you can't go back to the old behavior because it is more efficient. It's just that it's not Delta 4, right? You don't go bragging about like, dude, you have to like get CRED just the way we did with Uber. But when you experience it, it just organizes things better for you. It makes it easy for you to transact and all of that. And therefore consumers switch to this particular behavior and sticks to that. So long story short, it is not Delta 4, otherwise I would have not been doing all these ads and incentives and all of that if it was Delta 4. But it's a very affluent customer base, but I'm acquiring at a much lower CAC. So from a CAC LTV perspective, CRED is dramatically better as a business to compare to a bank. But from a Delta 4 perspective, which ideally acquire customers with low CAC, is not the case.
So both of us have probably never used CRED because we live in the US, and I don't think you're in the US market yet. So what is an example of a reward? Like, I use a Chase Sapphire credit card. If I could use CRED and I paid my bill on CRED, like what is an example of an incentive I'd get?
So then that's the interesting part. No matter who we are, we hate paying our credit card bill. Hate it, right? And India is a unique country where less than 5% of customers do auto pay, right? In the US, this number will be probably 35, 40% maybe. So 95% of customers are going through the pain every month to pay their bill and they hate it. So if you give any reward for doing that, I might try it because I'm like, damn it, like even if it means I'm gonna get something. Now we have a bunch of things where you get like some cab rides for free or a gym membership for a month or a dining voucher, like it could be anything, right? But the reason it succeeds is, think of this in a different way. Let's say I have to take a vaccine from, let's say, Dr. Ashish or Dr. Zain, and both of them cost the same, cause the same amount of pain, and are equally good, all of that. But Zain just gives me candies after the shot. So it's not the reward that made you pick Zain, it's the pain of getting the shot that made the candy feel like a relief.
So it's the contrast. It's almost like a delta situation in the
Yes.
experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Another interesting observation is that rewards are often better appreciated than monetary gifts. Like the whole point of, employee benefits is this like phenomenon where if you give like a swag or a week, a few days off or some other like non-monetary gift that
Yeah,
it sparks something.
the reason it is like that, I believe, is um, humans do not want to be treated that they are getting paid for time or paid for something. They don't want to feel transactional, right? Um, uh, let's say I'm just saying this out as an experiment. You got a neighborhood kid to come and do your lawn, and you have two choices. You can give them this cool gadget worth $50 or $50 of cash. Depending on how cool that gadget is and how rare that gadget is, they would probably appreciate that and not feel bad for doing a favor. And maybe what if they were not expecting money, right? Or what if they don't want to feel that they are just paid on an hourly basis? So I think most humans want to be feeling dignity versus just being transactional in cash. And I think it's a lot more pronounced in Asia, which is not a society that values money over status or dignity. And you will notice that, Asian parents will be like, "You think I'm gonna do this for $100 for this guy? Like, screw him! Like, I'm not gonna do that." And it's a little bit of that. My dignity is more important than my money, and I think it comes from a status-driven society where you value dignity and respect more over just converting everything into cash equation.
Kind of the free food metaphor. So where I went to college, if you wanted people to show up, you just offer free food, and if you offered $5, maybe they wouldn't show up, but free food, they're there. So
Well, that's actually a
Totally.
great example, and I think I would feel so cheap if my time was compensated with $5 versus, hey, there is this thing, I'm gonna give you some free food. Why don't you come? And it just feels like you are respecting my dignity instead of just trying to put some value to my time.
Totally. Kunal,
It's like a gift card versus a well thought gift. It just makes you
Right.
feel very different. It's super efficient to give a gift card, by the way. But most people, if the gift is relevant and well thought through, would be appreciated maybe 10x more.
yeah, totally. I'd much rather get a
Makes sense.
handwritten thank you than like a AMC
Perfect.
gift card, right? Like, yeah,
Perfect. But
Totally.
AMC gift card is super efficient,
yeah.
and therefore it's a huge business. But it does not make you feel great.
Right. So, Kunal, I really want to ask you about CRED's marketing strategy because Zain and I have worked in growth. I did growth marketing for many years at DuckDuckGo. And one, it's astonishing the scale at which you guys advertise. Like, and the creative and the strategy, really good. Like, you're hiring great talent, celebrities, and like the scripts are funny. You've got a great reach, it seems like. You must be reaching the majority of Indians monthly at this point. But my main question is about like the economics of it, because it's so hard to pull off in general, but especially like in the Indian market where GDP per capita is lower, and your audience is like a narrow kind of group. So how do you guys, what's your strategy of the marketing? And then how do you think about it from like a payback perspective? Like, what are your goals there, and how do you make sure that you're achieving those?
No, that's a great question. I think Indian companies are dramatically more inefficient in trying to make the payback work, and therefore founders end up owning a lot lesser of their companies by the time they are of a different size. But in India, television advertising has a unique impact of reducing your CAC dramatically in all other forms of marketing. The reason it happens is that India is a low trust society, and the moment you do a television ad, you are just respected and trusted a lot more, especially if you're an IPL sponsor and you got a celebrity, because low trust societies do not have good trust mechanisms, right? They are looking for how big you are, right? Oh, this guy seems to be a big guy, so let's buy from them, right? And therefore, you will notice that in low trust societies, superstars, super apps, and super companies exist. It doesn't happen in high trust societies. because we concentrate trust on a few things. You will buy Tata Salt to Tata Car to Tata whatever because you just trust them to be a big company, right? It's hard to imagine some of these things happening. Like Bollywood is a great example. Uh, 30 people probably control 90% of all of Bollywood revenue. That's the crazy. And nepotism is a great example of how we just have so much concentration of trust that we just say, oh, this one's kids. I don't care about the acting, it's this one's kids. I'm going to watch their movies, right? And I think it's an interesting phenomena where you don't see nepotism kind of work really well in high trust societies where you still value skill. It just works just fine in Bollywood. And therefore, majority of the stars right now are, I would say, 80% kids of the existing stars. And you'll notice that pattern. And the last one is super apps. You don't see that phenomena to be quite evident in high trust societies, but in all low trust societies, you will see super apps to be really doing well because once you capture trust, you can just kind of extend that to more services. And it's funny if I'm saying that, but if CRED ever launched, I don't know, a product which has nothing to do with CRED, it'll still do well. And same thing for Kunal Shah. Like, oh, Kunal Shah's company, a new company, it'll just do well, right? And I think as the world is getting low trust, you will see this phenomena kind of getting replicated in the US also. Oh, Elon is doing this, so let's go all in. Like, who funded the Twitter deal? People who just think that guy will figure it out. Do you think somebody would have got a business model Excel sheet right for Twitter to pay back to be there at 44 billion? No way you can make that sense, right? But you like, the guy knows it. So there's this concentration of trust where you like, let's just give money to this guy, he'll figure this out.
Totally.
What do you think differentiates a high trust from a low trust society?
Transactions are, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Like nobody in India would ever get stuff delivered and kept outside the door ever.
No, I totally buy that India is a low trust society. I can totally I think that's like fairly intuitive. But why is it a low trust society, and like why is a place like the US maybe like a higher trust? Is there like is it a maturity thing? Is it like a
It's a game theory problem. It's a game theory problem that if are the people who respect the code benefited and all the people who are defectors are getting punished, the trust of a community grows when you constantly do that. If you look at history of religion, history of countries, history of tribes, there is only one way to create trust in a tribe is you have good systems to detect bad behavior and punish it and reward great behavior. And that's when a society develops trust. But there's a unique problem that this is a controversial study done by some Stanford professors, which says that trust is directly correlated to multi-ethnicity. So you will notice that as societies get more multi-ethnic in nature, the trust declines quickly, right? So you will notice that all multi-ethnic societies constantly either have lower per capita income versus, let's say, when there is not multi-ethnic, you see the growth in per capita income. And I think US is going through that process right now where the ethnicity is kind of getting super diverse. And it's crazy. Like you would imagine that they're all Americans, but like why should there should be difference in that? But that's how mistrust grows in society. So role of institutions. For example, I remember being in SF a year or maybe just a little bit over a year ago, and I was scared because I could see crime around me, and I'm from India.
Sad but true.
I should be like not being worried about that, but as an Indian, I was really scared when I saw stuff, and I think there are some crazy rules where the bad behavior was not punished, and suddenly the people who believe in good behavior kind of left or did not participate in the society, and you have to quickly reverse that. Because the good guys just leave. Same thing for many countries where they suddenly start like really punishing for you to be more affluent. The thing is that if the billionaires really leave, and usually that means talent leaves, a country starts seeing decline.
So first of all, very fascinating. one thought is like there's like fragmentation of all different potential kinds, like ethnicity and race and class and caste, and all of those can create pressures to decrease trust, or also can be taken advantage of to decrease trust, by other institutions. And then on the other side, you kind of have like institutional stability, which kind of like counteracts that force. Like one example is like Singapore, right? Like extremely diverse population,
Yeah.
but like very freaking high trust. And then India or Mexico, like in some ways homogenous, at least from,
It's a super interesting
some
question.
perspectives, but low trust.
Super interesting question. There is something that Singapore did. If you read the history of Singapore, you'll find out that they actually did two, three super interesting things. Number one, if you lived in Singapore, there is a ratio of ethnicity per residential building.
Yep,
So
for sure.
it can never be more than 15% of Indians in this building, and it's enforced by the government in some ways. The second thing that they did is compulsory military. You will notice that any country where males early age go through compulsory military, they remove your old operating system that is ethnicity and install a new operating system that is country, right? So you will see wiping out of ethnicity and all the biases around that. Now, some countries have done that by killing religion. Some countries have done that by compulsory military. So there are a lot of interesting ways to make a multi-ethnic society become one. And there are some obviously very devious ways that people have tried to do that also in the human history. So we'll not go there, but there are some successful and not so successful methods how people have kind of removed the need to really feel different by forcing it to become one.
So this is a fantastic discussion. The initial thread was like trust, right? Like so you're in a low trust society. Your value add is to like create trust, right? There's an opportunity to distinguish yourself, and in CRED's case, it's a financial product. You really do need to establish trust, and the way you're doing that is through brand building, building a compelling product. So let's say, I mean, you're already doing that. You've done it, arguably. You will continue to do it. What happens then? Like, so you've built trust. What are you doing with that trust? Like, what's the vision for the company?
Yeah.
And kind of where does it go from here?
So what CRED does is aggregates high trust individual with good credit scores, good repayment behavior, good behavior on not defecting, right? But there are interesting manifestations of that. For example, in India, car insurance is actually on a car level and not an individual level. So you buy insurance at a car level. You buy insurance for a car, not for Ashish. And interestingly, because of that, Ashish's good driving or bad driving has no impact on the car's insurance per se. And I think what you see is interesting correlation between good credit scores and good driving, right? And suddenly, if you can create a positive selection of customers, you can actually potentially reduce the cost of car insurance. You could do the same thing for renting apartments. In the US, it's quite common for the landlords to ask you for your credit report before renting their apartment. In India, there is no such concept. I mean, I'll tell you the funniest thing. Like most people just dress up nicely in Indian clothes to go to the landlord so that they think that you're a nice, good Indian boy and give you the apartment for rent, right? I still remember Freecharge days. Like we had an Android engineer who moved from Haryana to Bangalore and goes to rent an apartment. And the guy was making a lot of money. He was like the top Android engineer that we could hire. And the landlord said, where do you work? And this guy's like, Freecharge. He's like, what the hell is that? And he tried to explain. And this is before we got TV advertisement and all that funding and all that stuff. And I remember the landlord told the guy that, beta, why don't you work at a company like Infosys or whatever and not do all this Freecharge stuff, and never rented the apartment to the guy. And on an average, we are paying maybe 4x more than Infosys ever paid for that engineer. But it's just that the markers of trust are so confused. So our view is that if I can create a positive selection of this, now obviously the intent is to take it even further, and I don't know if you'll ever do that or not, but in Japan or China, believe it or not, many dating apps have a credit score. Now that might sound like a super absurd concept, and suddenly we'll start talking about Black Mirror as a concept over here. But if you ask women, would they like to see something like that? They will say, yeah, it does make sense. to look at something like this. And in Japan and China, it's sort of normal in dating apps to put credit scores. And it's a double opt-in where you say, okay, I would love to see your score, and you say, okay, you can take my score, and you can see each other's score and go for a date, because it's usually more serious relationship where you want to consider kind of going and potentially getting married versus having a casual date. And I think it's an interesting thing where you can take the concept and take it further. And although we've done none of this implementation, but we have noticed like a landlord in Bangalore recently put out an ad saying that if you're a CRED member, you get a 5,000 rupees discount on the rent. And we called them like, why are you doing that? Like, oh, I know you guys are all high credit score customer. This is a great idea for me to do that. And I was like, interesting. Can this be a direction that the company can take? But before that, consumers with financial, so banks and financial institutions cross-sell a lot on CRED, and for them getting a positive selection of consumers just is powerful, and they love the idea of kind of creating. And my view is very simple. If benefits of being high credit score individuals dramatically improve, more people will care about the credit score, which is not the case in India. Most Indians will have no clue what their credit score is or care about it. And therefore the opportunity is massive on that front.
In terms of the monetization today, is it kind of like maybe not a great analogy, but kind of like Credit Karma, where like you earn a referral fee on certain high value products? Or is it kind of a mix of that and merchants? Like, it seems like the financial services are probably higher.
A combination of what Apple Card is doing with Goldman Sachs to what Credit Karma is also doing with multiple banks. So it's a combination of both of these things.
And what's the Apple Card business model? Is it interchange?
Yeah, so Goldman Sachs is the bank behind which is powering that. So it's a white label product that Apple offers powered by Goldman Sachs. So there's a revenue share arrangement. So they don't take the financial risk necessary for issuing cards or issuing credit lines or whatever, but they kind of get a revenue share by getting a large bank to be behind that.
Okay.
And so is that part of the medium-term vision for CRED to offer your own?
Yeah, we already do that. We offer a bunch of financial products as a cross-sell opportunity, either through a white label initiative or a co-branded initiative, or potentially a lead gen initiative, which Credit Karma does. So it's a combination of all of these things.
That's great. Zain, if you don't have anything else, should we transition to India?
Yeah.
So, Kunal, we would love to ask you about your views on, the Indian startup ecosystem. You see a lot. You're a founder of companies there. So maybe we'll start at a high level. Like, what's exciting for you about the Indian market right now? And then maybe the flip side of that is, like, what are some of the concerns or challenges you think that the ecosystem faces?
Well, I think the most exciting thing is that the country is leapfrogging to digital stuff. Like, for example, the financial services rails of India almost feels like it's 10 years ahead of US, like most of the stuff you see. But when it comes to infrastructure, we are probably 50, 60 years behind in terms of, or maybe even 100 years behind. So there are some parts which are just kind of moving really, really fast, and some parts which are not. But the thing is, the per capita income of the country is not growing fast enough, and a lot of people get that wrong because they think of India as this large DAU market. A lot of global companies love to acquire Indian users because you can easily get a 500 million DAU from here, which can add up to your numbers, and you can, like, you were in DuckDuckGo, you would know this stuff. Like, you were like, oh, all this DAUs from India, but you can barely monetize on the ARPUs on that.
We did know that, but we were very careful our payback period, so we invested $0 in the Indian market as a result.
But the thing is that you can get very large numbers. For example, YouTube probably has, I don't know, a few hundred million DAUs in India, and the ARPUs would be like the lowest that they would get in any other market, right? But when you combine a high ARPU market, low ARPU market, or mix it all up, you can look like a billion DAU company, and you might get appreciated in the market, and you play the long game. Because you can, if you have the muscle power of Google to kind of stay and be there for decades in a country, right? And you get the benefit of the ARPUs going up, and you can't get disrupted because you are the de facto utility over there in many ways. So, but the opportunity of India is uh, all about hyper efficiency on the stacks that the government is building, and we have got the lowest cost of data, smartphone penetration to like almost China levels. Consumers are super digital savvy. A huge amount of time spent on internet every day. Money movement is largely digital now, not cash. You've got many of the rails ready. The per capita income could be better. We are far away on that front. And you cannot just magically make that happen. The big concern I have is the female participation of labor. Less than 9% of urban female population is having any income whatsoever, which would be like was 90% for China before they took off on affluence. Right?
And you've these are like these are like very like college
Oh, yeah,
educated, like
yeah.
relatively
Most of them
wealthy,
educated people.
like
And
people,
but
right?
Ashish, think about this. I'm sure have you come to India for a wedding? Like I'm assuming that you
Of
have.
course, I'm
Yeah.
coming in a few months for my cousin's wedding.
Yeah, so you will notice that bunch of the cousins who are females, they like stop working as soon as they get married, and move transition into a full time role of either taking care of the family or kids or whatever, and they're not educated. They are educated like most likely even sometimes educated in the U.S. And come back and not participate in the labor force, which creates a very unique market where the per capita income of a lot of educated people is close to zero.
Fascinating.
But
You have
you should think about this like growing up, like for you guys in the US, like you must have noticed that South Asian moms were likely to not be fully employed or earning of their own income versus the all other ethnicities, like their moms were working full time. It's deep.
Yeah, it's tricky with the diaspora though, because there's a little bit of selection bias there. You know, the population that immigrates is slightly different from the I
But
think
even
population
then, you
at
will
home. But
see
I
the delta. Like as soon as some
yeah
affluence, they're like, okay, I'm gonna take care of kids. Like you'll see that pattern, even slightly pronounced in a market like US where it should be zero.
right. So I have a question for you, Kunal, because your you have the flexibility to really go wherever you want to go. You know what I mean? You have family members in London. You come out to San Francisco for business. I'm sure. I'm sure you've thought, well, is this where I want to be? Is this how I want to build my next company? So, like, what keeps you in India versus considering moving to, I don't know, Singapore or London or the U.S.? Like, what excites you, like, personally for building companies there?
I think just seeing it grow, the change is so evident, and you're able to kind of see a market to be dramatically different every 5, 10 years, and you can like even people who come outside they can see a big difference when you're there. Also, you see the difference of consumer behavior. So I think hyper evolution of consumer behavior, hyper evolution of business models. Uh, Interest in the region for a lot of capital, a lot of interesting talent coming back, and all of that. But uh, it's more about also just feeling for India. I think you just feel that everything that you've got is because of this country. You have to pay it forward. So the reason I also invest in startups, and that's the only investments I really make in life, is just kind of keep paying it forward. And I tell them that just remember you can do the same thing when you have liquidity in life to kind of keep paying it forward. And I think that if I can in my lifetime support 1,000 entrepreneurs and tell them it's great to pay it forward, then I could create a big change.
So I think that's a really good segue into your angel investing, Kunal. You're a prolific investor. You've invested in hundreds of startups. What are some areas you're finding yourself tuning into or investing in today? And how do you kind of evaluate investments?
I used to like spend time evaluating. Now I spend less time evaluating. It's mostly referral driven, and people just want me on their cap table, so it becomes slightly easy. But earlier I used to just like ask them, if you have to explain this to me like a 5-year-old, what would you say? And like And that was one principle. And most founders who know what they're doing, they can explain to you like a 5-year-old, like a 15-year-old, like a 60-year-old, they will be able to, because they're so clear in their head what the idea is. And the second version was that uh, did they have more insight about their industry than I did about their industry? That was a good filter for me. That like, if I am already at a superior level to understand how your industry works, then you are not good enough to be building a startup, because I am just part-timing my information into this industry and you are full-timing into it. So how can you not know better, right? And the third thing is this insights. You'll be surprised how poor the insight culture in early stage founders is. That like they just like trying to copy business models from the West. And interestingly, Delta Force is a great thing. You can bring a US model to India, it's not Delta 4. For example, India had funded like 12 laundry startups, and they were like Delta -4, because we have house staff in India that take care of things at a much lower cost. So how the hell are you funding laundry startups and getting away with that? But there was a time where people were just copying the US business models and trying to replicate over here. Not that I'm saying that laundry has become unicorn industry in the US, but at least in New York, you can see a few 100,000 customers using it. In India, why would you use a laundry startup?
Totally. And do you only invest in India today, or are you sort of like
Sort of in the region in Southeast Asia, but like 90-95% India.
And so when you have so many investments, like hundreds, right? And you've got like this really demanding full-time job, how do you sort of like find the time to support founders? Where do you find yourself like being able to add the most value?
To help them, WhatsApp just works fine. I think I like to take my breaks between my work to see if I have a problem statement from a founder. I'll send them a voice note, and like we talk about stuff. And it's an interesting format I've come to, where people will ping me for hard problems in life, and I'll tell them that they're sometimes they're delusional, sometimes they're not thinking right, sometimes how would I solve it. But it's mostly with the intent to just support and be there for hard problems.
I have to say, I think it's really cool that you are supporting founders and staying in India. Like, I think there's so much opportunity there, and it's easier than ever to build a startup. But I feel like the one thing people are lacking are just like role models, to be honest. You know, they're here in the US and Bay Area, there's tons of role models of people building giant companies. But I think to see someone in India doing it and staying it is already making such a change. And, you know, you see it online, you see it when people talk about your businesses. So I think it's awesome. We have a couple of questions that we ask every guest at the end. We'd love to jump into those. The first is, what is the most challenging or difficult feedback you've received, and how have you processed it and incorporated it moving forward?
I've been told, and that was a little bit of more of a recency bias, but I've been told that when I check out on people, I stop listening to them. Like when I've checked out of somebody, I'm like visibly forgetting that they exist and they have an opinion and all of that. And I think and I was shocked that I'm otherwise a good listener. And when somebody gave me that feedback, I was like, I need to really work on that, because if I really don't want them to be around, I should probably let them go versus kind of make them feel alienated with my behavior. So I don't think I have overcome that completely, but it's definitely something that was hard to accept. But what I have figured out as a way to do is to constantly seek. And I think what happens is when you do well in life, you create power distance with your team members. So you have to create some trusted people who can seek feedback on your behalf sometimes, and keep working on it and doing that. But people have to see a change in you. Otherwise, nobody gives you feedback. They do it once and you're like, it's a waste of time. It's going to be the same. So I think that's the one. Otherwise, I just constantly seek feedback. I think, it's like if you think of yourself as an app, the only way you're going to ship great features or remove bugs is take user feedback. And I think most people do not release newer versions of their apps quite often.
I just imagine the pop-up that says, "How would you rate us 0 to 5 stars?" and like asking people on Zoom or something. No, but I think
Or thinking
that's
about,
like
hey, here's the new release which has fixed these 3 bugs.
exactly. So actually, this is great for the second question, which is around superpowers. So everyone has a set of skills that feels like play to them but work to others, and we find that like a lot of founders especially end up acknowledging their superpowers or identifying them and leaning on them. So I'd love to ask you, like, what are some superpowers that you've identified in yourself that you like to lean on day to day?
Connecting dots that don't have any normal connection between them. I think that's the only superpower I can think of. And I think that comes from a little bit of a philosophy background, a little bit of a not being disciplined as a child. All of those factors combined. I do believe that if you have been disciplined as a child, you lose the superpower of connecting random dots because that skill is systematically killed by disciplining parents. When you try to connect random things and they'll be like, focus and focus and focus. So it doesn't work. There's an interesting study which showed that scientists who also were doing some performing arts or music had 22x higher chance of getting a Nobel Prize or something versus the guys who did not do any of those things. So I think if you can make your neural pathways all over the place, and that seems to be an interesting pattern by itself. So I've noticed, and it's anecdotal, but I've seen like all good consumer founders have either a history of performance arts or not being disciplined much as a child.
I love that. So one more question: is there anything that you've been reading recently, or any like content you've been consuming recently that stuck with you that you would recommend to others?
Nothing much. I have a bunch of books that I want to really get into, but I'm trying to connect random topics on energy and evolutionary biology and how the neurons in the brain work and how insights are generated in human brain. So I have a bunch of topics that I have a lot of interest in, but the last few months have been terrible at kind of catching up on reading. I think I've developed even more of ADHD to struggle with to be able to concentrate on books. So I'm trying to see if I can switch to a video as a medium to learn now, because books I'm not able to keep up with, and it's hard with doing a full-time business because my natural problem, I read something and I want to really apply, and like that becomes really frustrating for everybody who's working with me because they're like, this guy is just like, it's great when I'm in a 0 to 1 stage because I'm just connecting so many things. And 0 to 1 is an art for that reason because you can't really make 0 to 1 happen by just like putting ingredients in a kitchen. It has to come from a place of inspiration.
Totally. Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Kunal, this has been such a fascinating and enjoyable conversation. We're so glad we got to have you on. Thanks for sharing your insights, and we're rooting for you, and we'd love to have you on sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thanks, Kunal.